Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one. One where we dive into tons of great stories and books, and another where we just dive into tons of great, interesting topics. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, let's learn about Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Who? Yes, you need to know about this individual. I would guess that most of my audience does not know who this is, but like I said, what if I told you one individual back in the 1660s was so obsessed with trying to look at existing pieces of cloth under a microscope, and he couldn't see enough? He wanted to see clearer. He wanted to see more detailed in his fabrics. And this got him on the journey. And what did he end up seeing? Something under a microscope that he made by himself. He told no one, that no one had ever seen before. Talk about a story. And what did he do in this moment when he saw something moving under his own microscope? He changed the world forever. Today we know them as microorganisms. Today we know them as the beginnings of our understanding that this germ theory of disease was all wrong for hundreds of years. And we found out that, yes, these little microorganisms are something we call bacteria. But for thousands of years, no human being had any idea that these tiny creatures existed. Until Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Yes, say that 3-4 times in a row. Listen, he's an amazing individual. Would we, without this gentleman, understand that diseases today exist? Would doctors know what caused infections? Would medicines even exist the way they do now? Yes. Anton von Leeuwenhoek is the man who discovered this entire hidden world. So, how do we know what he saw? At the time, of course, mid-1600s, there were no cameras, no recordings, no photographs, but he did something incredibly important. He wrote letters, hundreds of them. He sent these letters to the Royal Society in England, one of the first scientific groups in the world. In them, he described everything he saw in careful detail, what it looked like, how it moved, even how many he counted. Those letters are still out there today. So we can tell his story without guessing, without understanding, is this really true? Because we're reading his letters that he published during this time. He was born in 1632 in the Netherlands. He wasn't raised to be a scientist. He didn't go to any college. He didn't study language. The language scientists used at the time was Latin. He wasn't part of this world, and that's the fascinating part of this man's life story. He became a cloth merchant. His job was to examine fabric, and to do that, he used small magnifying glasses to look closely at all the different threads. Most people would check the cloth, move on. He didn't. He kept looking closer and closer. And like I said up front, he became obsessed. At the time, most people had very different ideas about our entire world. If someone got sick, they didn't think about bacteria or germs. I mentioned the germ theory is something that became huge in our world in terms of being able to keep people to live longer, to treat diseases. People were dying through history and famines by the millions, and we weren't able to help them. Doctors for hundreds and thousands of years had no clue how people were getting sick. They blamed it on quote unquote bad air. They called this miasma. They thought illnesses came from smells, the weather, because as far as anyone knew, there was nothing smaller than what the eye could see. Now, the microscopes. He wasn't the one that invented microscopes. They did exist, but they weren't very good. They used multiple lenses stacked together. That sounds powerful, but it actually made images blurry and distorted. It was like looking through several foggy windows at once. Scientists could magnify things, they could, but not clearly enough to discover, really, at this microscopic level, what was out there. So this is where Anton did something completely different. Instead of building bigger microscopes, he made them smaller. I mean, you can see this in our classroom, elementary school classroom. We have these plastic magnifying glasses. The bigger the lens, when you look through it, well, you can see something and you can magnify it. You can make it larger. But if you really want to magnify it, so it's really powerful and you can see something even smaller become bigger, you look through the tiny little lens, right? Well, his microscope was the size of a cracker. I mean, I'm talking about a little cracker, not like a Triscuit cracker. It was thin. It was like rectangular shaped. If you know, I'm looking at a club cracker right now. It was that small, but the microscope, the actual microscope, we're talking about the lens, the whole piece was a thin piece of brass with the tiny hole, and inside that hole was this single lens. A pin held the object like a drop of water, and small screws moved it back and forth to focus. Take a look at a picture. Go on YouTube and you can see it. They're still out there today. It certainly didn't look too impressive, but it was because that tiny lens was the most powerful part of all. Now, I'm sure you're thinking up front, because I know I was thinking this, hey, how is it that you can turn glass into like this super duper lens? Because this is what he did and no one had really done this before. Let's picture something simple. Imagine a tiny drop of water sitting on a table. If you look through that drop, things underneath look bigger. Why? Because the drop is curved, and that curve bends light. A lens is just like that, a carefully shaped piece of glass that bends light in a way that makes things appear larger. I mean, just to bring home this point, this may sound confusing. No, light travels in a straight line. So it goes through a window. We still see it. The window's flat. But if something is curved, like this water droplet, like a curved lens, like a stretched out lens, piece of glass, what happens? The light curves. You've got to think of the analogy of like you're riding a bike in a straight line, but suddenly the road curves. Well, you have to turn. Well, that's what happens to the light. The curved surface of this lens, or when we made the case of the water, it forces the light to change direction. So this is the cool part, where the light gets magnified, where it is such that our eyes now see something that's small in front of us, bigger. Why? Because when that light bends in just the right way, it spreads out the image before it reaches our eyes. You've got to think of like a panoramic view, but it's really stretching the picture. So instead of seeing something tiny, our eyes receive a bigger version of it. What Anton realized was just so unique and fascinating, and it's surprising that no one else came up with this idea earlier. But if you could have a drop of water that could make things look bigger, he was thinking, of course, what if I could make a tiny perfect drop out of glass. And that's exactly what he did. He created this tiny, perfectly curved glass bead, like a super-powered droplet. And it bent the light even more precisely. He worked on it and he worked on it. And that's ultimately what allowed him to see things that no one else could see. And it's relatively easy. I mean, it was, when you think about what may be required with inventions and making big machines. No, there were no machines, no factories, just a lot of patience, like I said. What he did was he melted the glass. He would heat a thin strand of glass over a flame. As it melted, the glass naturally pulled itself into a tiny round bead, almost like that water droplet that we talked about. That bead became the lens, and the secret was the smaller the bead, the more powerful the magnification. A big, flat piece of glass barely bends light, but a tiny, super curved bead bends it a lot. His lenses were sometimes as small as a grain of sand. That extreme curve is what made them so powerful. He also ground and polished lenses by hand, rubbing glass against rough surfaces, then smoothing them carefully. One tiny scratch could ruin everything. He took patience to the next level. So each lens, like I said, took time and incredible care. Now, if you look at this early microscope that I talked about that looks like a club cracker, you got to hold it right up to your eye. You got to look through this tiny little lens. It's like a pinhead. And then you have to adjust the screws behind the brass plates, the microscope. And you got to keep your hands perfectly still. So the day that changed the world, he was looking at water and how it changed colors throughout the seasons. And of course, if you're curious, you're wondering, you're asking questions, well, let's take a look inside this water under my new microscope, and maybe I can get some answers. So he put this pond water under his little lens, and there was nothing. But when he looked through and he focused, he saw movement. Tiny creatures were swimming, spinning, darting around all over the place. They were alive. He actually gave them a name, animalcules, like little animals. He didn't know what these were. Remember, he's not a scientist. He's not trained in any of this. He was just curious. So he described what he saw. He saw little tiny rods, little round shapes, spirals twisting through the water, creatures that zigged and wiggled and moved. So today, we know what they are. They are microorganisms, including bacteria, which are simple single-celled organisms, protozoa, which are slightly larger, more complex single-celled life, and algae, tiny plant-like organisms in water. Some moved using tiny tails, others pulsed, some glided, some spun like corkscrews. He was watching an entire microscopic ecosystem. He is the father of microbiology because of what he first saw looking at this pond water. Well, he just believed, like I said, that these were tiny living animals. And technically he was right, but what he didn't know was what they did. He didn't know that they could make people sick. That idea came much later through this germ theory of disease that I've talked about. We will certainly have this in a future episode, but scientists like Louis Pasteur would eventually prove that these little microorganisms, bacteria, can cause illness. Before that, people blamed bad air. After Anton, medicine, ultimately, now years later, but ultimately medicine changed for the better. Anton von Leeuwenhoek, just a regular middle-class guy, was born in 1632. He passed away in 1723 at the age of 90, when most people didn't live past 40 or 50 during this time. I mean, really amazing life. His father made baskets. His mother came from a brewing family. He didn't have any special upbringing. He wasn't particularly educated to be anything smart. He was sent away to learn a craft. And yeah, he became a cloth merchant, as I mentioned. But his ultimate great attribute was his curiosity, his patience, his independence. Hey, for a long time, most of this work he did on his own. And yes, he made it widely known throughout the world with his letters. But, again, he was just a normal guy. He married twice. His first wife died relatively young. He later remarried. He had several children, but sadly, most didn't survive. Only one of his daughters lived into adulthood. And this whole life, he never left his hometown of Delft. It was Delft, Delft, in the Netherlands. He didn't become a professor. He didn't change careers. He just continued to work as a merchant and ultimately a city official. But while he did all this, he was quietly making microscopes and writing his letters about discoveries. It took some time for people to believe what he was saying. Scientists obviously took off with it. But this gentleman, who lived to be 90 years old, changed the way that we see the invisible world around us. He was the first, and he changed the world forever. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive on a man a lot of us don't know, but when you think of the microscope, think of this gentleman, and I'll say his name one more time, Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group, OK Let's Learn. We have a YouTube channel, OK Let's Learn. They're both in the podcast notes. Always appreciate any 5-star ratings and any reviews that you can give the podcast. Hit that plus button on Apple Podcasts in the top right-hand corner. That will allow you to subscribe so you can get new episodes right there on your phone. The episodes are coming out every couple days, sometimes every morning. So, until next time, have fun and keep learning.